James Elkin's little book on the strange place of religion in contemporary art explores two cultural practices that are perpetually in tension. He concludes his study by observing I have tried to show why committed, engaged, ambitious, informed art does not mix with dedicated, serious, thoughtful, heartfelt religion. Wherever the two meet, one wrecks the other. That is not to imply the two sides should maintain their mutual mistrust, but that the talk needs to be very slow and careful. But despite this conclusion, Elkins, however, does not think that art and religion should go their separate ways. None of those solutions addresses the genuine difficulty of the subject. It is impossible to talk sensibly about religion and at the same time address art in an informed and intelligent manner. But it is also irresponsible not to keep trying. Elkin seems dissatisfied with his own conclusions. I find this one of the book's chief virtues. Art and religion do not mix. However, we must continue to reflect on art and religion together. Elkin's ironic approach offers a stiff challenge to those who claim to have it all figured out, who tie up too quickly and neatly the loose ends of both art and religion. Elkin simply cannot dismiss or disengage art from religion, despite the fact that he cannot resolve their relationship in a way that he finds satisfying. The two cultural practices, art and religion, are thus perpetually separated, yet inextricably linked by this tiny conjunction, and. Heeding Elkin's warning, my remarks will be slow and careful and perhaps a bit too tentative for those who are anxious to formulate a definitive Christian perspective on Elkin's or contemporary art. But the stakes are too high. I have much invested in this tiny conjunction. As a Christian who was reared in a believing Christian home, rears his children in the Christian faith, and spends a startling amount of money on tuition for their Christian day school, where my wife also works as a preschool teacher, the relationship between art and religion is not merely of scholarly interest. My exploration of the relationship between art and religion as a curator and as a critic is the pursuit of faith-seeking understanding. I am unable to disentangle my spiritual development as a Christian from my intellectual development as a curator, critic, and art historian. The most recent iteration of my pursuit has recently taken the form of a book. I'm a Luddite when it comes to technology. The most recent iteration of my pursuit has recently taken the form of a book due out this fall, and I must note that the series of lectures I gave at the art department at Biola 8 years ago have played an important role in the development of my work. And so my remarks this morning will be directed to the evangelical community within which Biola has played a flagship role throughout the 20th century and is poised to continue into the 21st. It is a community with which I am intimately familiar. What cultural practices has Elkins connected with this tiny conjunction? He defines religion as a, quote, named non-cultic major system of belief, end of quote, such as Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, Islam, or Buddhism. Elkin's definition of religion is significant for two reasons. First, it offers no value judgment. It is clear that Elkins deeply respects religious belief and practice, and in this he stands out in the contemporary art world, where most critics and art historians consider religious belief, consciously or not, to be merely a symptom of a lack of education, deficient thinking, or the result of unfortunate geographical location. Moreover, Elkins also includes in his definition of religion what he calls their trappings, such as, quote, rituals, liturgies, catechisms, calendars, holy days, and what have you, end of quote. This is an important observation, for religion is not merely the sum total of beliefs or dogmas to which one must give mental assent. Elkin's definition of art is also important. Quote, art is whatever is exhibited in galleries in major cities, bought by museums of contemporary art, shown in biennials and the Documenta, and written about in periodicals such as Art Forum, October, Flash Art, Parquet, or Tema Celeste, end of quote. Elkin's frank assertion of high or museum art and its continued life through the narratives of modernism and postmodernism in artistic practice poses an immediate challenge to the evangelical community. which often dismisses modern high art and the contemporary art world as elitist and anti-Christian. In its place, it has tended to redefine art in one of three ways. First, it will identify authentic art with the figurative style of the Renaissance and Baroque, transmitted through the academic tradition. Second, it will define high art as liturgical art, or art produced for the church as patron. These first two approaches results in an exaggerated and distorted attachment to a golden age where high art and Christianity operated hand in glove. Third, it will eschew fine art altogether and engage contemporary visual culture through film, music, and design. The result is that discussions about art and religion from these perspectives redefine art in order to work more closely with what is already understood to be religion. In other words, art is shaped to accommodate religion. But Elkin's approach, which emerges from the contemporary art world, not from a predetermined religious commitment, bends neither art nor religion, and thus offers to the Christian community a different way to conceive of these practices. Evangelicals simply cannot dismiss the history and development of modern art as irrelevant. Here's our Duchamp. Franz Klein, Jackson Pollock. Oh, sorry. Gadzooks. This approach of ignoring modern art keeps the contemporary embodiment of high art at arm's length, to say the least. The problem, particularly for art departments like Biola, is that contemporary artistic practice, as Elkins defines it, is not at arm's length. It is next door. Not only is it what is being taught at area MFA programs like Claremont, Santa Barbara, Long Beach, USC, and UCLA, it is what students can travel less than an hour to see, whether at galleries like LA Louvre and Griffin, private collections like the Broad Foundation, or museums like the Hammer, LACMA, and MoCA. An important reason why art and religion, as Elkins defines them, do not mix is that each side has a calcified view of the other that ultimately insulates their most committed practitioners from recognizing deeper connections between them. Each side regards the other to be important in theory, but has, through corrupted contemporary practice, denigrated its true nature. So, from the perspective of artistic practice, the cranky Christian right and soppy televangelists have obscured the teachings of Jesus. And from the Christian perspective, the work of Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, and the Chapman brothers have made a mockery of the achievements of Raphael, Rembrandt, and Giotto. Despite the significant grains of truth in each criticism, such perspectives tend to weaken the virtue of self-criticism, ignoring the log in one's eye as one observes, excuse me just a second, I have a little trouble reading this. Ignoring the log in one's eye as one obsesses about the splinter of wood in the eye of the other. Elkin's book is refreshingly free of such distortions. In addition to the massive breadth and depth of his scholarship and his extraordinary intellectual ecumenism and collegiality, Elkin's great strength as a scholar lies in his ability to develop taxonomies and other categories as a means to sort out, divide, and analyze complex problems. This yields important and significant results when he explores art and religion. However, I would like to push further, complicate things a bit by finessing Elkin's definitions of religion and contemporary art, by looking at that tiny conjunction "and," that strange space between religion and art, which can seem as vast as Lessing's ugly broad ditch. My approach takes his two clean, tidy rooms, one labeled art and the other religion, and messes them up just a little bit. Rather than see this tiny conjunction that keeps art and religion together but also perpetually apart, I consider it to be porous, to be a hallway connecting these two rooms. It is a hallway that not only connects them, that enables movement from one to the other and back, but is also messy, where stuff from each of the rooms spills out. Although I do considerable work in each of these rooms, most of my time, however, seems to be spent in the cluttered hallway as I shuttle back and forth. My practice as a curator, critic, and art historian takes place in the little nooks and crannies between art, theology, and philosophy. My collaboration with Los Angeles-based artist Enrique Martinez Celaya on numerous projects has made me keenly aware of the space between art and religion that Elkin's marks. And Irish philosopher William Desmond's own work on what he calls the porosity of being, through his reflections on art, philosophy, and religion, has offered a productive conceptual framework. I show you an example of one of Martinez Celaya's paintings entitled Thing and Deception, which was painted in 1997, and it's in the collection, the permanent collection of the Sheldon Art Gallery. It's a painting that I published an essay on in Religion and the Arts, a journal that's sponsored by Boston College. You have a chocolate Easter bunny and a veil over it, and in pencil that you can't see from this image is handwritten 2 words, needed proof. And so my discussion focuses upon the Eucharistic implications of this painting. The porosity of this hallway is risky, however, as I learned through my experience with Martinez Celaya. As I approached his work from a distinctive Christian perspective, his work pushed back, not necessarily to resist my approach, but to exert pressure on my preconceived patterns of thought derived from habitual ways of applying a Christian perspective to cultural practices. In some way, looking at his pictures and reflecting on them has played a role in my own religious development, every bit as important as my reading of the scriptures, study of the fathers in church history, and participation in any number of spiritual practices. This is all the more shocking because Martinez Celaya is not a religious believer in any way, shape, or form, despite the religiosity of his artistic practice. His work embodies Wittgenstein's enigmatic admission, quote, "I am not a religious man, but I cannot help seeing everything from a religious point of view," end of quote. Rather than take as rigid and static a certain Christian worldview, which one merely applies to contemporary art in order to decode the worldview of the artist, the integrity and aesthetic complexity of the work of art should at the very least be allowed to prompt a more self-reflective position on one's own religious worldview. And this also applies to artists, critics, and art historians who reveal a shocking lack of knowledge about religion in general and Christianity in particular, even while their own practices are in perilously close proximity. But both religion and art have their constituencies, their board members, patrons, colleagues, and the like, that conspire against such messiness. Both have their confessional watchdogs. That is why my experience of this cluttered hallway, although exhilarating, is often terrifying and sometimes lonely. There are very few people in this hallway, but there are some. Not only have I met Martinez Celaya there, I have bumped into the New York-based independent curator, philosopher, and critic Klaus Ottmann, curator of the site Santa Fe Biennial in 2006. An avowed atheist who has told me unapologetically that art is his religion. Ottmann, Martinez Celaya, and I have had wonderful hallway experiences several years ago when we discovered that we shared a deep interest in Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling, Tarkovsky's film The Passion of Andrei Rublev, Pascal's Pensées, and St. Augustine's Confessions. That the greatest icon painter in the history of the church, an existentialist Lutheran philosopher's text on Abraham and Isaac, private thoughts by a Catholic mathematician, and the conversion story of one of the greatest saints of the Latin Church could be the common ground for discussion with an agnostic Cuban-born artist, atheistic German-born critic, and a conservative Christian art historian from Nebraska has to speak to something significant. Let me suggest that this tiny conjunction between art and religion, this cluttered and narrow hallway between their tidy rooms, is liturgical practice. It is the liturgy that might offer the most provocative porosity between art and religion. Both religion and art are practices. They are embodied. And the heart and soul of any religion is its liturgy. Religion is not merely or simply believed, as if it is the sum total of our intellectual thoughts about it. It is practiced. From the Greek liturgos, which means literally the work of the people, liturgy is religion's work. It is art's as well. There is much contemporary artistic practice that can be experienced in and through the framework of liturgical expression. My forthcoming book, God in the Gallery, addresses, albeit briefly, the work of such artists as Gabriel Orozco, Wolfgang Leib, James Lee Byers, Janine Antony, and Robert Gober through this liturgical lens. I look at an installation by Enrique Martinez Celaya that he and I worked on at the Sheldon Art Gallery a couple years ago. This is a work entitled Coming Home, and it's a tar and feathered boy confronting an elk made of tar and feathers. I show you this image to focus upon this liturgical moment of acknowledgement of this boy as this boy confronts this elk and seems to bow. You have a mirror between the antlers, and I should just give you an aside. A few weeks before the exhibition, and Enrique had already produced this work several years earlier, he sent me a number of JPEGs and an astonished email saying that he had found these images out about doing research, and they were images of St. Huestis. The iconography of St. Huestis is St. Huestis confronting an elk, and the elk has between its antlers the crucifix. And this conversion is very much about visual culture. And Enrique had never seen this image before and was amazed by some of the parallels of this elk with this mirror and how it related to the conversion of St. Huestis. This is another work of his. Klaus Ottmann curated an exhibition in Limerick, Ireland last year, and he included a sculpture by Enrique Martinez Celaya, this young boy, as this boy is raising his arm. This is in St. Mary's Cathedral in Limerick, and this gesture has a liturgical resonance that takes on greater weight within the context of this cathedral. One of the several spaces that Ottmann's exhibition that Ottmann used as installation spaces. And I also show you an installation photograph of Robert Gober's installation at St. Mark's, or at Matthew Mark's gallery a few years ago. Christianity is an embodied religious practice. It is embodied through its chief dogma, the Incarnation, which declares that the spiritual can indeed be experienced through, not in spite of, the material. And all liturgical and sacramental practices affirm this dogma. These are the trappings. These are the trappings which Elkin refers to in his definition of religion. In his book, Is There a Sabbath for Thought Between Religion and Philosophy?, William Desmond suggests that sacramental rituals keep open a space of porosity between the human soul and what ultimately exceeds it, even if also an intimate communication with it. This offered a way of dwelling in the world with a non-literalistic mindfulness, a poetry of the divine. This porosity is embodied in the liturgy's circumvention of the great Enlightenment dichotomies and autonomies, such as the individual and the community, self and other, matter and spirit, immanence and transcendence. The Christian tradition declares that human beings are sacramental and liturgical creatures whose vocation it is to work in the temple that is the world that God created. Much contemporary artistic practice relies on and gives expression to this basic human urge. In fact, there is some performance art that, although it appears opaque in the context of art, makes perfect sense interpreted within, say, the ascetic tradition of Christianity. For example, the performance artist Linda Montano engaged in a one-year performance in 1984 through 1985 called Art and Life with the performance artist Tay Shin Shea. They tied each other together. They were attached with a rope for a full year. So they had to negotiate each other. They had to negotiate their private and public space. Again, it's an example that within the context of looking at, from a Christian perspective, looking at it within the lens of traditional understandings of the visual arts, it's obscure and it seems to be anti-aesthetic and something that is problematic within that Christian perspective. But if you look at it through the perspective of ascetic Christian practice, it makes perfect sense. Perhaps one of the more poignant recent examples of liturgical expression comes from literature, from Cormac McCarthy's The Road. The boy sat tottering. The man watched him, that he not topple into the flames. He kicked holes in the sand for the boy's hips and shoulders where he would sleep, and he sat holding him while he touched his hair before the fire to dry it. All of this like some ancient anointing. So be it. Evoke the forms. Where you've nothing else, construct ceremonies out of the air and breathe upon them. Much of contemporary artistic practice is like some ancient anointing, making ceremonies out of the air and breathing upon them. Sensitivity to the liturgical and sacramental dimension of contemporary artistic practice means that Christians must live a Christianity that is liturgical and sacramental. Evangelicalism, however, is anti-liturgical and anti-sacramental, and so it is largely insensitive to those aspects in contemporary artistic practice that might resonate most strongly with religious practice. Contemporary artistic practice requires a richer, fuller, deeper, and more expansive Christianity, one that is nourished by a liturgical and sacramental worldview that can experience, interpret, and find meaningful even something as strange as contemporary artistic practice. St. Paul had a choice on Mars Hill. He could easily have condemned as blasphemous those altars erected by the Greeks to the unknown God. And that seems to be the strategy of much contemporary evangelical reflection on contemporary art. But St. Paul did not do that. As he walked around those monuments and altars, he creatively interpreted them to be, in fact, altars to the one true God, whom the Greeks honored without full knowledge. St. Paul's apologetic was to complete their knowledge, to fulfill it, not to destroy it. That is the model for Christian participation in the contemporary art world. It is to show how and in what way contemporary artistic practice participates in, embodies, and points to religious truth, whether or not the artists themselves intend as much. The Russian Orthodox theologian Alexander Shmeiman once said, echoing the Church Fathers, that to be a Christian means to see Christ everywhere. But we as Christians become comfortable seeing Christ where we expect to see him, where we want to see him. But Christ is everywhere, even on the streets of Chelsea, graduate studios at UCLA, installation spaces at the Hammer, and the book lists of MIT Press. Do we have the courage and imagination to find Christ there, even if it risks messing up our own tidy artistic and religious rooms? I want to thank Jim Elkins for having the courage and imagination to engage in an honest and intellectually rigorous exploration of art and religion. It has deepened, challenged, and refined my own work as a critic and curator, as well as a Christian. And I want to thank the art department at Biola for their courage and imagination to take Elkin's argument as seriously as it deserves and to convene this symposium. Thank you.